It was a quiet Monday morning when I first met her, Karen, the self-proclaimed protector of the neighborhood. I had only recently moved into the lake cabin full-time, a choice that took me years to finally make. I was a veteran, partially sighted after a training accident, and had saved every dime to convert what used to be a weekend retreat into my full-time sanctuary. Peace, water, and trees. That's all I wanted. That, and time with my loyal Labrador, Samson, my trained guide dog who never left my side. Samson was more than just a pet. He was a working animal, certified and trained to help me navigate daily life. He was calm, obedient, and smarter than most people I met, which, as it turned out, included Karen. Karen lived about 4 cabins down from mine. Her place looked like it belonged in a high-end suburban neighborhood, complete with fake shutters, decorative rocks, and a front porch that had HOA board president written all over it. She didn't own the lake, of course, but she certainly acted like it. I first noticed her because she would often walk by with her little white Pomeranian, barking like a wind-up toy, and glare at Samson like he was some kind of wild wolf. I usually just nodded or waved politely. I didn't come to the lake to make enemies, but as the days passed, her behavior grew colder. She began crossing the path further away from us, whispering loudly to her dog things like, "Some people shouldn't have animals like that," or "Dangerous breeds have no place in this community." It was absurd. Samson had never barked, lunged, or so much as looked at another dog the wrong way. He was trained to ignore distractions and focus solely on assisting me. But Karen wasn't interested in facts. She saw a large black lab with a harness and immediately jumped to conclusions. Worse, she assumed she had authority where she didn't. The cabin community wasn't under her HOA jurisdiction. Let's be clear. I lived outside her fancy subdivision. My property line backed up to the shared walking path that circled the lake, and while the HOA maintained the path, it crossed both public and private parcels. Mine included. I didn't care. I'd let folks pass through as long as they were respectful. But Karen? Respect wasn't in her vocabulary. One Thursday morning, I was sitting on the porch drinking coffee while Samson sat beside me, his head gently pressed against my knee. The air was crisp. It was one of those mornings that makes you grateful to be alive. That was until I heard Karen's voice slicing through the quiet. "He's off leash again," she yelled to no one in particular, phone already in hand. "That dog is aggressive and not restrained. Someone needs to call animal control before it hurts a child." I blinked. At first, I thought she was joking. Samson was clearly in his vest, clearly right next to me, and clearly not causing trouble. I stood up and called out, "He's a service animal, ma'am." "You're mistaken." But Karen just shook her head, lips pursed with the kind of smugness that should be illegal in all 50 states. "I've seen the way it stares down other dogs. It growled at Muffin yesterday. My HOA says dangerous animals aren't allowed. You'll be hearing from us." From us? Again, I didn't even live under their HOA. They had no jurisdiction here. But Karen, apparently, had appointed herself sheriff of the entire lake. That night, I got a knock at my door. 2 local animal control officers stood there with clipboards and apologetic expressions. "Sir," the older one began, "we received a report of a potentially dangerous dog on your property. We're required to follow up." Samson, still in his harness, calmly sat at my feet and looked up at them like he was expecting treats. One of the officers chuckled. "This him?" I nodded. "This is Samson. He's my registered guide dog. Want to see his paperwork?" They did, and I showed them everything, certifications, his ID, and even vet records. The younger officer shook his head. "Honestly, this happens more than you'd think. People report animals out of spite or fear. We're sorry for the inconvenience." Before they left, I asked, "Did she give a name?" They shared a look. Let's just say the woman lives over on the HOA side. Blonde. Walks a tiny white dog. Karen. I muttered. "Yep," the officer said. "She's a frequent flyer." Apparently, this wasn't her first time trying to weaponize the system. Over the next week, Karen escalated. I would hear her whispering to her HOA friends as they passed my dock. I saw her take photos of Samson from afar. Once, I caught her trying to film us as we returned from a grocery trip. her phone held up behind a pair of fake sunglasses like she was some kind of budget spy. But the last straw came on a Sunday afternoon. I was out back, cleaning the kayak while Samson napped under the shade. A car I didn't recognize pulled up near the walking trail. Out stepped a man in khakis and a clipboard. He approached with purpose. "You the gentleman who owns this cabin?" "Yes. Can I help you?" He introduced himself as a HOA compliance officer. Though he didn't show me a badge or official ID, he held a stack of printed papers with photos of Samson, many zoomed in from a distance, and said he was issuing a formal warning for having an unrestrained, dangerous animal near shared community grounds. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I had no other reaction left. "This is an HOA property," I said, pointing to the deed posted by my mailbox. "And that dog is a certified guide dog. You're trespassing." The man backed up, clearly unsure how to proceed now that he'd been challenged. I was told this was community jurisdiction. "By who?" "Karen." He didn't answer, just mumbled something about needing to report back to the board. I snapped a photo of him and told him to leave. That night, I sat on my porch with Samson asleep by my side, the lake lit by the orange glow of sunset. I realized this wasn't just about a dog. Karen wasn't afraid of Samson. She was afraid of losing control. The kind of person who feels powerless unless she's enforcing a rule or punishing someone. And in her eyes, a blind man with a loyal dog, living peacefully outside her authority, was the ultimate insult. So she did what people like her always do. She used whatever tools she had to make life harder. But she didn't know I'd been documenting every incident. She didn't know I had legal friends who owed me favors. And she certainly didn't know who was planning to visit next weekend, because that's when everything would change. My guest, my old friend and fellow vet, was not only a federal animal law investigator, but also a man who'd seen firsthand how dangerous false accusations could be. And Karen? Karen was about to learn the hard way what happens when you lie to the wrong people. Because Samson wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline. And I was done letting her threaten that. It wasn't even a full day after the visit from animal control that I saw Karen again. This time, she wasn't storming up my porch. She was standing across the lake road, arms crossed, sunglasses pushed up like a badge of entitlement, whispering into her phone while staring directly at my cabin. I could feel the tension from my porch. It was the same energy I'd seen back when I was stationed overseas, the kind that comes right before mission goes sideways. Except this time, it wasn't insurgents or rogue elements. It was a woman in pastel activewear who had somehow decided that my guide dog, Dakota, a calm, gentle yellow lab trained for medical alerts, was a threat to her community. And clearly, she wasn't done. That evening, while grilling some venison with my buddy Alex, a fellow vet who came up for the weekend, we heard a car pull into my gravel driveway, uninvited. And this time, it wasn't a Prius or a city SUV. It was a black pickup truck with a logo I didn't recognize until I walked closer. It said, Animal Behavioral Enforcement Services. My stomach dropped. That wasn't just county animal control. That was private enforcement, and hiring them meant someone had shelled out real money to escalate things. "Mr. Braddock?" the man asked as he stepped out. "That's me," I said, voice steady but already irritated. "We've received multiple reports of a dangerous, aggressive animal on these premises. We're here to inspect the property in the Animal Per Ordinance Code 8.41. "Hold up," Alex interjected. "Dakota? The one that just helped you inside the house 15 minutes ago." The officer's partner chimed in. "We don't get to decide the validity. We're here because of the number of complaints." "From who?" I asked, even though I already knew. They wouldn't say. But they didn't have to. Karen, this woman had now officially escalated from public nuisance to coordinated harassment. They asked to see Dakota. I agreed, but only on my terms. "Wait right here," I said, then walked inside and got Dakota's official guide dog certification, his military medical companion registry, and the service record from his original handler who trained him for PTSD and diabetic alerts. As I returned, I saw Karen. She was standing behind her white garden fence across the street, phone raised, filming everything. I held the papers up like evidence in court. "This is Dakota," I said. "He's not just certified. He's military registered, federally protected under ADA laws, and has more honor than half the HOA board." The officer, thankfully, was professional. He reviewed everything, noted the service dog vest and ID chip, and after a 30-minute walkthrough, confirmed no signs of aggression, no hazards, and no violations. But he left me with one chilling statement. "She's filed 4 separate reports in 5 days. If another one comes in, we'll have to investigate again under county pressure, even if we know it's false." That's when I realized Karen's real weapon wasn't law. It was paperwork fatigue, forcing repeated inspections until I either gave up or slipped once. Over the next week, it got worse. Every other day, I get a random check. One was from the county sanitation department about alleged pet waste runoff into the lake. Another came from code enforcement, claiming I'd erected an unauthorized animal enclosure. The cherry on top, a letter from the HOA lawyer claiming that emotional support animals were not permissible under recreational property agreements, which was completely false and illegal. At this point, I called my lawyer, Barbara, who had been with me since my military discharge housing settlement. She was a bulldog, well-versed in disability law, and she was furious. She's targeting a disabled vet with a service animal. We're going to turn this back on her so hard her yoga mat will snap. But Barbara didn't stop there. She filed a pre-litigation notice with the county, claiming ongoing harassment under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and began compiling evidence of negligence by the HOA board for failing to stop one of their members from escalating. Meanwhile, Karen's antics got more unhinged. One morning, I stepped outside and found a laminated flyer taped to my gate. Warning: aggressive dog on premises. Unsafe for children. HOA sanction pending. She made fake warning posters. Another night, I caught a teenager, someone I didn't recognize, trying to sneak photos of Dakota through my side fence. When I confronted him, he just said, "Some lady paid me $20 to get dog pics for a neighborhood post." That's when it hit me. She was trying to gather fake evidence, to build a story she could spin into HOA action. But she didn't expect what came next, because my friend Alex, he had a background in cybersecurity. We checked her public posts, dug through the HOA's member forums, and, sure enough, found everything. Photos, videos, manipulated timestamps, and even one photo she reposted from another dog attack case, pretending it was Dakota. That was federal fraud. We gathered screenshots. Barbara filed a cease and desist with formal notice of pending litigation. But we weren't done yet. We also contacted a local veteran disability advocate, who in turn contacted 2 regional news stations. One of them was already working on a piece about disability discrimination in suburban neighborhoods. A week later, I got a call. "Mr. Braddock, would you be willing to do a short on-camera interview?" I paused, then smiled. "Yes, but I want to do it from my porch with Dakota by my side." By the time the segment aired, Karen's face wasn't shown, but her house was blurred in the background. The story aired under the title, "Local Veteran Harassed Over Service Dog by HOA Member. ADA Investigation Launched." That night, Karen's house went dark. No porch lights. No SUV in the driveway. And when I walked Dakota down our usual evening trail, she didn't come out screaming. But I wasn't done, because the final blow, that was coming next, and it was going to hit her where she least expected it. Right inside the HOA board meeting she thought she ran. I didn't even hear the animal control truck pull up. It was early afternoon, and I just finished fixing the porch railing my uncle never got around to. My guide dog, Rocket, was snoozing near the steps, belly to the sun, totally unbothered. He never barked at vehicles or visitors unless there was a legitimate threat, and this wasn't one, until I heard the knock. 2 uniformed officers, one male, one female, stood at the edge of the porch. Their SUV was parked beside my gravel driveway, idling. Rocket sat up immediately, not out of aggression, but because he sensed my tension. "Good afternoon," the male officer said, nodding politely. "We receive a report of a dangerous dog residing here. You the owner of the German Shepherd?" I paused. My mind snapped to Karen. I took a breath. I am. His name's Rocket. He's my guide dog. The female officer raised an eyebrow. Mind if we ask a few questions? Just standard procedure. Rocket stayed calmly at my side as I invited them onto the porch. I had his certification binder sitting on the shelf by the door, and I handed it over without saying a word. They flipped through it, reading the registration, disability certification, and the letters from both the training center and my VA case manager. So, he's a medically licensed service animal. The male officer said flatly. Yes, he's never bitten anyone, never even growled unless someone's been threatening me. The female officer glanced back at the truck. We were told he lunged at a neighbor and growled aggressively at a child. That made me pause. Lunge at a neighbor? Rocket doesn't leave the porch unless I do. My voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Did this neighbor happen to be named Karen? The male officer blinked. I believe that was the name on the report. Yeah. I shook my head and sighed. She's part of an HOA that doesn't govern this property. She's been harassing me and my service dog since we arrived. To their credit, the officers didn't immediately jump to conclusions. Do you mind if we observe the dog? No contact, just behavior assessment. Not at all, I said. Rocket down. He lay flat, tail wagging lazily. The officers watched as I went through a few basic commands. Sit, stay, heel. Rocket performed with military precision, not once glancing at the strangers, not once showing teeth. All right, the male officer said, closing the binder. This looks like a false report. We'll document it as such. If it happens again, feel free to reach out. We take false filing seriously. I thanked them, and they left without incident. But my hands were clenched when I closed the door. Not out of fear, out of rage. Karen had escalated things. Rocket's training was his life. My life. Without him, I was vulnerable on hikes, near the water, even just walking down a slope. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This was dangerous. And then came the next phase. 2 days later, I found a printed HOA citation duct taped to my fence post. Notice of violation, unleashed aggressive dog. Immediate removal recommended. It wasn't official. It had no HOA letterhead, no reference number, no legal enforcement. But the phrasing was bold, intentionally designed to scare. Beneath it, scribbled in red Sharpie, other residents have reported barking, growling, and threats. Dogs must be registered with the HOA or removed. I almost laughed. There were no other residents. My nearest neighbor was almost 400 yards up the hill. The rest of the homes? Some are only cabins. Empty. And Rocket? He didn't even bark at raccoons unless they got too close to the door. Karen was clearly forging official-looking letters and planning them as scare tactics. But what she didn't know was that I'd already installed trail cams along the cabin perimeter after the last break-in attempt years ago. So I checked the footage. There she was, in broad daylight, walking briskly down my gravel path with a clipboard, stopping at the gate, pulling something from her bag, and taping it to the fence. Then she took a photo with her phone, probably to send to someone pretending it was official business. She didn't see Rocket watching her silently from the upstairs window. She didn't know the camera was rolling. That night, I contacted my lawyer in the next town over. Matt, I said, I need a formal cease and desist drafted. She's now forging citations and falsely reporting a federally certified guide dog. Is Rocket all right? He asked. He's fine, but I want her legally warned and, if possible, to have this escalated to the sheriff's office. Matt agreed. She's committing fraud. Let's send the first letter tomorrow. The cease and desist letter was delivered via certified mail the next day. But Karen didn't stop. 3 days after the letter went out, I got a knock at the door. This time, it wasn't animal control. It was Karen herself. And she wasn't alone. She had 2 men with her, one holding a phone and filming, the other wearing a neon vest marked Community Animal Enforcement. My stomach dropped. This wasn't real. This wasn't a county officer. This was some made-up HOA patrol, likely a friend or cousin, and the phone in the other guy's hand was already recording me like I was on some Suburban episode of To Catch a Criminal. Karen pointed at Rocket, who sat stoically beside me on the porch. "That's the dog," she shouted. "He's been running loose, threatening community members. This is your final warning before we issue a citation and remove him ourselves." I didn't respond. I simply turned to Rocket. "Rocket, door." He walked calmly inside. Then I shut the cabin door and called the sheriff. "Yeah, this is Kyle Monroe. I'm out at the old Dunlin Lake cabin. I have someone impersonating an enforcement officer and making threats about seizing a registered guide dog." The dispatcher didn't even hesitate. "Deputies are on the way. Keep your doors locked." I watched through the curtain as Karen and her team milled around my porch, pretending to document violations. It took the deputies 10 minutes to arrive, but when they did, it was glorious. They pulled up with sirens blipping once. Karen's 2 goons jumped. One tried to put his phone away quickly. The other stammered something about being invited. They weren't. 2 deputies got out, and the older one approached Karen immediately. "You the one impersonating animal control?" "What?" "No, I was trying to enforce the HOA guidelines. There are no enforceable HOA rules on this property, ma'am. This man owns the land outright. You have no legal authority here." Karen opened her mouth, but he cut her off. "And your friend here, wearing a vest marked community enforcement. Do you have a license with the state? Any credentials at all?" The man in the vest stammered. I was just helping impersonate a government officer," the deputy said dryly. "That's a misdemeanor." Within minutes, the second deputy had them lined up near the car, taking down statements. I watched from my porch, silent. Rocket sat next to me, sensing the tension but staying still. Calm, like always. The deputies eventually came over, asked to see Rocket's paperwork again, and thanked me for the call. The older one added, "We've had trouble with that HOA before. They think they run the whole lake. But this crosses the line. If she steps foot on your property again, file trespassing charges." That was the moment the tide turned. Karen realized she wasn't invincible anymore. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. But I did start planning. Because Karen had made it personal. And the best revenge wasn't loud. It was legal. And it was coming next. I don't think Karen ever expected me to fight back. After the second visit from animal control, she assumed I'd be scared, that I'd get rid of Scout, that I'd fall in line. She had no clue I was already working behind the scenes, and what was coming next would flip the entire narrative on its head. But before the final blow landed, things escalated again, and this time Karen made it personal. A week after the second false complaint, I received a letter. Certified mail. The envelope was thick, stamped with my HOA's emblem in the corner. I sat down at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, opened it, and immediately felt the blood drain from my face. Inside were formal accusations, not just about the dog. Now, they were claiming my property violated architectural conformity. They claimed my dock was too wide, that my solar panels weren't HOA approved, that I had unauthorized fencing, and the kicker? That I was in violation of approved pet species guidelines. They even quoted obscure bylaws stating animals posing a threat to community tranquility were ground for removal or fines. This was war. The fines were listed as pending. But if I didn't comply within 14 days, they threatened to lien my property. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to financially ruin me. Now, here's where Karen made her fatal mistake. She thought I didn't have a network. She thought I was just some blind guy living in a lake cabin with no connections. What she didn't realize was that my best friend from college, James, was now a civil rights attorney who specialized in ADA violations. And I had already forwarded every report, every note, every letter, every HOA bylaw to him. Within 24 hours, James called me with the tone of someone ready to unleash legal hell. "This is one of the worst ADA targeting cases I've ever seen," he told me. "They're about to regret everything." We filed a formal ADA complaint with the Department of Justice, not just against the HOA, but Karen by name, because as president, she had signed every complaint, every citation, and had verbally identified Scout as a dangerous dog without evidence, despite him being a registered and certified guide dog. But I wasn't done. While James handled the federal side, I hired a local land use attorney to go after their threats on my dock, solar panels, and fencing. Turns out, my property was grandfathered into zoning laws that made all of their claims unenforceable. In fact, the HOA had no jurisdiction over my dock because it was built before the HOA was even formed. Their whole case was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide was rolling in. That weekend, I decided to test something. I took Scout out for a walk along the common trail near the waterline that connected to the HOA's main park area. As expected, Karen saw us from her porch and came marching over like a storm cloud with heels. "You're not allowed here with that dog," she screeched, pointing like some sheriff in a spaghetti western. "Actually," I said calmly, holding up my phone, "you might want to be careful what you say. This is being recorded, and the Department of Justice is already reviewing your statements." She froze. "What?" I filed a complaint, with evidence, including what you just said. Scout is a registered guide dog. You've harassed me. You've made false statements. You're done. For the first time since I met her, Karen didn't have a comeback. She stood there with her jaw twitching, her face going pale. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed back to her house. That same evening, 2 people from the HOA board came to my property, but they weren't there to serve more papers. Mr. Daniels, one of them, a man in his 60s, said respectfully, we wanted to apologize. We didn't know everything Karen had been doing." I nodded, listening carefully. "She kept saying you were violating rules, and we didn't see the full context. But now that legal action's been filed and we've reviewed your evidence, we're holding an emergency meeting to vote on her removal as president." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just said, "I appreciate you doing the right thing." Then, just for good measure, I walked Scout to the edge of my dock, sat on the bench, and watched the sunset while he rested his head in my lap. Proof that the so-called dangerous dog was the calmest soul in the entire neighborhood. But the real revenge? That was coming next. Because what I did after their attempted retaliation didn't just restore my peace. It exposed everything. And it made sure Karen would never hold power in this neighborhood again. The courtroom felt like an icebox. Not in temperature, but in tension. HOA Karen stood stiff as a marble statue behind the defendant's table, her arms crossed, eyes darting, lips pressed into a straight line that betrayed just how uncomfortable she was under the fluorescent lights and direct questioning. I sat beside my lawyer, Mr. Whitman, cool, composed, and sipping from his thermos like this was any other routine case. It wasn't. Not for me. And especially not for Karen. Because this wasn't just about a guide dog anymore. This had become about reputation, liability, and criminal intent. We had already submitted the security footage of Karen tampering with my dog's outdoor harness. Footage that showed her approaching my cabin deck while peering around like she was casing the place. She unlatched Daisy's tether. Then, in a twist of insanity, she ran toward the road and screamed bloody murder as if my service animal had charged her. Her plan had been to provoke a reaction. A dangerous one. She had called animal control already, then set up the attack, so it would appear real. What she didn't expect. The multiple trail cameras I had hidden in the pines, the motion alerts on my smart home system, and most damning of all, the neighbor's doorbell cam that caught her rehearsing the incident the day before. The judge, a stern woman with years of HOA disputes behind her, leaned forward and asked a pivotal question. "Ms. Harris, do you deny entering the plaintiff's property and unleashing his registered guide dog without permission?" Karen's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her lawyer scrambled to object. But by then, the courtroom had already seen the footage. She knew it. Everyone did. My wife squeezed my hand gently. Her eyes never left Karen. This woman had tried to endanger my freedom, my dog's life, and my livelihood, all because we didn't fit her definition of lakefront HOA material. After a brief recess, the judge returned with a ruling that sent Karen reeling. Not only was the HOA ordered to pay damages for harassment, trespassing, and emotional distress, but the court also issued a temporary restraining order against Karen, barring her from coming within 100 feet of us or our property. But here's where it got even better. The county sheriff's office, having received the full footage and deposition, open a criminal investigation. Karen had filed a false report that resulted in a dangerous dog designation hearing. That's a felony in our state, especially when the animal is a registered service animal, and the owner is a disabled veteran like me. By the end of the week, Karen was being fingerprinted and booked at the county jail. The same Karen who barked HOA bylaws at everyone now had a mugshot. She wasn't smiling in it. Word spread through the lake community like wildfire. Residents who had previously been too afraid to speak up began coming forward. One woman revealed how Karen once tried to get her black lab removed for barking during thunderstorms. Another shared that Karen had fined her teenage son for parking his bike on the curb for over 10 minutes. Nobody had stood up to her until we did. The next HOA board meeting was a scene out of a movie. Over 24 residents showed up, way more than usual, and demanded Karen's removal from the board. A vote was taken. Karen was unanimously ousted, replaced by a retired schoolteacher who openly apologized for the way the HOA had treated us. But justice didn't stop there. I filed a civil lawsuit, not just against Karen, but against the HOA itself, for allowing her to act unilaterally without oversight. Our lawyer had a paper trail a mile long. Fake citations, forged letters, fines never voted on. When discovery revealed that Karen had sent out fake board memos using official HOA letterhead, without approval, the judge was furious. They settled 6 figures. Enough to pay off the cabin. Enough to donate to a local guide dog foundation. Enough to set up a scholarship for veterans with service dogs, named after Daisy, the golden retriever who stayed loyal through it all. But the final moment of poetic justice? Karen had to sell her house. Not voluntarily. Between the fines, legal fees, and mounting public embarrassment, she listed it as is just 2 months after the ruling. And guess who bought it? One of our oldest friends, a fellow veteran with a sense of humor as sharp as his memory. On move-in day, he placed a wooden sign right on the porch where Karen once screamed about HOA violations. It read, "This property respects service dogs and their owners." We had a quiet celebration that evening at the cabin. My wife grilled on the deck. Daisy laid at my feet, her tail thumping lazily against the wooden floorboards. And for the first time in months, the air felt still, the lake calm, and our home truly ours again. Sometimes justice doesn't come in roars. It arrives in sighs of relief, wagging tails in the silence of a cabin finally free of barking Karens.